of God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen. Please be seated. This story we've just heard has always bothered me. The story of Jesus showing up late, purposefully late. There is no hint in the Gospels that this is a character trait. Sure, Jesus is busy all the time, constantly surrounded by people, even when he attempts to go away by himself to pray, but he never, as we might say, overbooks himself. And always, he shows up, and the moment he shows up becomes exactly the right moment. But not this time. This time, he's late. And yet, why? He loves Mary and Martha and Lazarus. In this Gospel of John's, we see him stopping by to visit more than once, even staying for a while. He clearly cares for them, and differently than the way in which he clearly cares for everyone. They seem to have been his friends, not like the disciples, whom he loves, but whom he is perennially having to instruct and chide and explain himself. But friends, real friends. Friends who seem already to know the truth of who he is. Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died, says Martha. But even now, I know that God will give you whatever you ask of him. They know him. But when they call, Jesus doesn't do what a friend would do. He doesn't go. He waits. He lets Lazarus die. He lets him die, and he tells his disciples he has done this so that they may see and know God's glory, that God's glory might be revealed. Other stories in the Bible demonstrate that the revelation of God's glory or presence is always something stunning, and generally something which we mere mortals find astonishing. It is God revealed in fire or in wind, in a cloud or blazing light, or through the sudden appearance of terrifying angels. God is other, unknowable, the mystery beyond our comprehension. If Jesus' point is to reveal God's unknowable glory, why enforce the brutal fact of Lazarus dying, the reality of which devastates Mary and Martha, and which he himself experiences in a visceral way? The death of his friend Lazarus is punctuated several times by some of the only expressions of personal grief we witness in the entirety of the story of Jesus. Other than in the Garden of Gethsemane, just hours before his own death, it is the only time we see him weep. Why? Why put everyone through these awful moments? Why go through this kind of loss himself? Franciscan priest Father Richard Rohr writes, "Humans are the only creatures who have knowledge of our own death, in that we know it's coming. There is a point in our lives when we begin to realize that we are finite on this earth. Jesus is the thread, the link between earth and heaven, the link between finite and infinite. Jesus shows us life, real mortal life. And Jesus shows us the mysterious, the astonishing, resurrection, the unbelievable, that claims death is not, in fact, the end of the story. Jesus doesn't want us to look away from mortality, from the reality of life that is death, but equally, Jesus wants us to see and experience the glory of God, the astonishing, overwhelming presence of God. Jesus demonstrates through his actions and ultimately through his very self that the human cycle is not just birth into life, into death, but that there is one more stage, that unknown life beyond death. Jesus shows us that unimaginable mystery of eternity resides beside us, right next to the reality of our mortal lives with their inevitable ends. It is there, most of the time existing just beyond our vision, although from time to time, and maybe not quite, as witnessed by Mary and Martha, we catch a glimpse of that more. Glimpses that linger like the dream you almost but don't quite remember. My grandfather was born in 1911 and was the youngest by many years of 6 children. His family lived and worked in California's gold country. They had a large 2-story cabin in the Sierra Nevada mountains, which they used whenever they were working their gold mine, the Pine Nut Mine. They never struck it rich, but they supported the family from the proceeds of the mine for a good number of years. By the time my brother and I came along, the mine was long closed, but in the summertime, my family would go to the cabin with my grandparents. There was no electricity or running water, but my grandfather's brothers had laid pipe, which still carried icy cold water down from a stream further up the canyon, and it flowed into an outdoor trough just beyond the cabin steps. Inside was a wood stove for cooking and heat, a cold cellar for storage, large chairs covered in ancient cushions, magazines from the 1930s for some reason, and evenings of cards around the long dining table, the room lit by oil lamps. During the warm afternoons, my brother and I would look for porcupine quills on the high, wide wraparound porch and shotgun shells beneath. We checked out the abandoned bear cage, now mostly overgrown with weeds, played on fallen trees, and hiked to the opening of the long closed and abandoned mine. It was too dangerous to enter, but standing in the entrance, you could feel the wisps of cold air that snagged at your bare legs and ankles with invisible icy hands. At night, we climbed into high iron beds piled with quilts and prayed that at no time during the night we would need to make a trip outside. We were in the mountains, so no matter how warm the afternoons and how safe the cabin felt during sun-drenched days, there was a moment after dark when you realized you were quite alone, halfway down a mountain canyon. Those porcupine quills had to have come from somewhere, and if there was an old bear cage, well, those black bears were probably still in the vicinity. Being human suddenly didn't seem like such an advantage. I remember having to go out into the night from time to time, creeping down the wooden stairs with my flashlight, everyone else still sleeping in their beds. Stepping out the door onto the porch and then down to the ground, I kept my eyes peeled for wildlife and large shapes moving between the trees, and it was all momentarily terrifying. But then I looked up. Stars upon stars like I have never seen since. The sky wasn't black, it wasn't blue, it didn't even seem like sky at all. It was the universe, spilled out above my head, an extravagance strewn with innumerable lights. It was vast, filled beyond my imagining, and it felt as if the weight of those stars and planets of the entire light-filled sky pulsed and pressed down upon the earth, down upon my small, fragile, mortal self. Any fear I had of being out in the dark night vanished when face to face with the astonishing appearance of this normally invisible world right there before my very eyes. I was a child then and did not yet have words to express it. But I know now that in that moment, my mortal self came face to face with the limitlessness of immortality. Finite and infinite were intertwined together in a few extraordinary moments. I think this is what Jesus was trying to show Mary and Martha, and everyone else who witnessed the extraordinary events recalled in our gospel. finite and infinite, intertwined together. Jesus walks everyone through the experience of mortality, through the fear of being small and human. He walks them out into the darkness of death. He doesn't allow it to be missed. He has them face the fear of it, the finality of it, the grief surrounding it. But in order to do this, he had to be late. They know him. They believe he could have saved Lazarus, but he doesn't. Jesus doesn't save him. Instead, he walks with them through the mortal world with its hurt and stink and tears, and then, only then, does he show them it is not the end. Only then do they look up from the ground to see the miracle arrive. Only then do they see that there is more, that life still happens, that life continues. The poet Mary Oliver wrote, "Keep some room in your heart for the unimaginable of life into death and into life. Like Mary and Martha, you may have to cross a bridge built of tears and fear to get there, but Jesus shows himself to be that bridge. He is the bridge to the unimaginable, to resurrection, the bridge to the impossibly star-filled sky, pressed so close it will take our breath if we but catch a glimpse, if we cross that bridge from life into death and back again into life."